We're also following the latest on the 2020 race, where New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio has dropped out. We're going to have a lot more on that in just a bit. But first, as we were just talking about, there's a mysterious whistleblower complaint about President Trump, and it involves Ukraine. CBS News confirms an official from the intelligence community was so alarmed by the president's recent conversation with Ukraine's newly elected leader, they filed a formal report with the Inspector General.
Now, Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee are demanding answers. President Trump has sent several angry tweets out about this. Here's Nancy Cordes.
If the president of the United States said to the president of Ukraine, investigate the corruption in your country that has a bearing on our 2016 election, isn't that what he's supposed to do?
The president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, said Mr. Trump didn't do anything wrong in a phone call with the president of Ukraine. But Giuliani admitted that he did ask the Ukrainian government to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter, who worked for a Ukrainian gas company.
So you did ask Ukraine to look into Joe Biden?
Of course I did.
Giuliani claims Biden himself tried to bribe the Ukrainian government to get his son out of legal trouble. But that claim is unsubstantiated. And even before this whistleblower's complaint came to light, Democrats had launched an investigation to determine whether the president and his allies set up a quid pro quo, demanding that Ukraine investigate a 2020 presidential rival in exchange for military aid.
That the president of the United States, whoever he is, has every right to tell the president of another country, you better straighten out the corruption in your country if you want me to give you a lot of money.
The contents of that whistleblower complaint might shed some light on all this. But right now, the acting director of national intelligence is refusing to hand it over to Congress.
Do you believe that the White House or the president himself are pressuring the acting director of national intelligence not to hand this information over to you?
All I do know is this. I don't know whether the White House is directly involved, because we can't get an answer to that question. But we do know that they are making some claim that a privilege may apply. Well, that narrows the category who may be intervening here.
All right, for more on this, we want to bring in former FBI agent and special assistant to James Comey, Josh Campbell. He is the author of a brand new book called Crossfire Hurricane, Donald Trump's War on the FBI. We're really so happy to have you here.
Very timely.
Very timely
boy,
book.
Oh boy.
So, all right, let's get into this, Josh. This whistleblower, this story, these allegations that have come to light in the last couple of days, how unusual, and I know we've used the word unprecedented often in the last 2 years, but how unprecedented is it for an intelligence official to come forward and report something like this about the president of the United States? There have been whistleblowers,
Sure.
but at this level, with the chief executive, with the commander-in-chief, is this unusual?
We've never seen anything like this. And you know what's so interesting is that we're learning more details now, but when this first started, the news reports coming out that there was possibly this whistleblower, you know, I was telling folks that don't look at this like it's just another scandal in the age of Trump, the weekly scandal that we then move on from. This felt different, and certainly now as we gather new information about what this might entail, it feels even more so. I think what is interesting, and you know, we've seen this president is stress testing these institutions of justice, the institutions of the intelligence community, their independence, and now it appears as though we're on the cusp of the White House possibly being able to shut down a whistleblower from getting information to Congress about something that this person saw that troubled him enough to blow the whistle.
You know, there are defenders of the president who say, you know, it's not really the job of the intelligence community to be listening on conversations that he has with world leaders. What do you say to those people?
Well, so we don't know the dynamic that was underway with this call, whether or not it was someone that actually was listening, or maybe they saw a transcript or a readout. But again, any other president, a normal quote-unquote president, would do anything they can to help the intelligence community as it relates to foreign governments. You know, taking you inside, like the CIA, for example, they continue to try to put together, you know, these portfolios of world leaders. Obviously, if a president talking with them, you want to be able to glean information. And so it's not unusual that the intelligence community would get to know what the president was doing as he talked, you know, with these foreign leaders. What is so troubling here is that this person was so concerned with something he or she heard that they decided to report it. But again, it is yet to be seen whether that person is going to be shut down. There's one troubling aspect of this also that, you know, as someone who used to work in the Justice Department, I don't know what their role is here. We've heard that these reports that this has gone through the Justice Department. We've seen the pattern with the current attorney general, running interference for the president? Are they trying to prevent embarrassment here? We don't have the answer to what their role is.
You know, we were talking to Weijia Jiang yesterday, one of our correspondents, and she said something really interesting. She said that, you know, part of the challenge for the president is that he still thinks that the intelligence community is supposed to be working for him. Do you agree with that?
Right. He certainly believes that. And, you know, as you look back on this, you know, campaign of attack I write about in the book, this war on the FBI, it's essentially the president, you go back to when he first started, where he was attacking the intelligence community for wiretapping him at the behest of President Obama. And I was in the FBI at the time, and of course, we're sitting there wondering, what in the world is he talking about? But I think, and there are, you know, former colleagues who would agree with me inside the Bureau, that he probably thought that the president did have the power to direct these agencies in any way that they see fit, and perhaps they were now bucking him and not going along. But of course, anyone who knows these organizations, who knows anything about history, understands that there's independence there for a reason, because we have in the past seen real intelligence abuses. But he appears to look at these entities as simply arms of his own presidency.
You know, I want to totally dive into the book, but I have one more question about this. I was reading a series of tweets from Jack Goldsmith, who's a Harvard law professor, and he makes two interesting points, I think, as a student of history, which is that the president of the United States should be able to conduct foreign policy in a phone conversation with the world leader, and that Article 2 of the Constitution does grant the president that power. And he goes on to say this, I'm quoting his tweet here, Article 2 gives the president the authority to do and say and pledge awful things in the secret conduct of U.S. foreign policy. That is a very dangerous discretion, to be sure, but has long been thought worth it on the balance. In other words, the founders said, look, the president has to be able to conduct business, but I think the founders, I'm guessing you're a lawyer, the founders also thought the president is going to be someone who will do it in the best interest of the United States. In this particular situation, the allegations could potentially be that there was some kind of a quid pro quo. That would supersede what Article 2 says, right?
Right, that's right. And I mean, what's so interesting here, too, is that, you know, if you recounted that set of facts about the current issue without knowing the history of this president, you may think, well, maybe the president is playing 3D chess here as it relates to a world leader. But look at his interactions with Russia and Vladimir Putin and other foreign governments, other dictatorial regimes. We have been long questioning why he treats Putin the way he does, you know, essentially placates him, sides with him over the intelligence community. It's that pattern that is now troubling here, because I think that gets rid of the innocent possible explanation that maybe the president is doing this for, you know, in this interest of the country, which is very troubling. One other interesting aspect is, you mentioned Jack Goldsmith. He used to be the head of the office inside DOJ, which has reportedly been involved in this whistleblower issue. And this office has great power inside the government. It's essentially the president's legal office that would tell him what is legal, what is not. And so, although most of the Justice Department, you know, strictly adheres to the U.S. Code, this office can create its own policies and rule on certain things. And so, you know, again, going back to the person who's leading the Department of Justice right now, William Barr, it will be interesting for us to see whether this legal office is trying to provide the president cover by, again, as you mentioned, you know, these very powerful article powers. Are they trying to shield him by looking at the greater, you know, the power of the presidency rather than the possible illegality that might be at play here?
Really interesting.
Okay, so let us dig into the book, right? Crossfire Hurricane, Inside Donald Trump's War on the FBI. So it's one thing to be disappointed to learn that the FBI is not an extension of the presidency, right? But it's another thing to be adversarial. How does that benefit the president? What do you think is at the core of this?
Well, you go back and look at the start of this presidency and the origins of the Russia investigation. He's essentially been under investigation since he started, or people, you know, that were associated with this campaign. And I remember being inside the FBI at the time, you know, we were wondering, why does he continue to undermine us in the intelligence community? Fast forward to Robert Mueller coming on the scene, which obviously the president attacked him seemingly on a daily basis. And so the thought was that the president and his allies in Congress and in, you know, what I kind of call the right-wing spin machine, they were essentially trying to undermine Mueller for the sole purpose of undermining whatever Mueller came up with in the end. If you can convince people that the investigators are corrupt, that this is a cabal of deep state, you know, people who have violated their oath, they're going after Trump, then whatever they come up with, you can point to and say, look, I told you all along, this was, you know, flawed from the beginning. I wrote this book to tell you how the FBI really works, how these investigations really take place. And I go through the number of ways that there couldn't be this deep state inside the government because of the checks and balances and different powers. I will say this book does not give the FBI a pass. This isn't an endorsement of the FBI. I'm very critical of certain of their decisions and certainly the decisions of some FBI leadership. But in the main, and you know, on the whole, I want the viewers to understand that this is an agency that stared at the facts as it related to Russia and the Donald Trump team and tried to stop a threat.
So you think this whole sort of undermining of the intelligence community is really collateral damage because it was really just about this one investigation.
I think that's right. And, again, to be fair, I don't think Donald Trump wakes up every single day thinking, how do I, undermine public safety? It's very personal and narrow for him that, look, they're coming after me, so I have to destroy them. This is a pattern for him. We've seen, and not just him, other politicians, sometimes they play dirty, they go after people. The problem is this isn't your run-of-the-mill political enemy. This is an institution of public safety. If you undermine their confidence that the American people have in these agencies, you hurt all of us as it relates to public safety.
We pointed out as we were introducing you that you're a former FBI agent, and you wrote an op-ed. I want you to give a sense to our viewers of why you chose to dedicate your life to public service, working for the Justice Department, and then why you wrote that op-ed where you told the world essentially that you could no longer carry on in your responsibilities and your duties.
No, I appreciate it. I joined the FBI right after 9/11. It was a mission that I wanted to be a part of, to not only figuring out what had happened in the past, with this incident, but ensure that it didn't happen again. And so that was what I was geared toward. Spent almost 13 years in the FBI and a number of assignments all over the world. Got to see, a lot of the FBI's mission. But toward the end, before I stepped out, into this more public role, I was getting frustrated. My colleagues were getting frustrated because this campaign of attack that I write about was underway, and there was silence from the heads of the leadership of the Department of Justice. Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, silent. Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, silent, except for when he was personally being attacked. Then he would make an exception and then try to speak out, which, obviously angered a lot of people in the Justice Department because these are the leaders. If the White House is saying these people are a bunch of crooks and leadership isn't stepping up to speak out and say that that's wrong, then obviously they absorb blows that they shouldn't. So I looked around and thought, okay, they're not speaking up. What can I do in some small way to try to help the American people understand what's fact, what's politics? These institutions aren't perfect. Again, they're made of human beings, but to help, cut through the noise, essentially. And so I'm trying to do just that, to help them understand that this political campaign is dangerous. As long as it continues without people stepping up to speak out, I think we're all going to be worse for it.
Do you think it's working? And the reason I ask you that is because we've spoken to your former boss, James Comey, and also Andrew McCabe when he wrote his book, right? And I really did get the sense that both men were trying to do exactly what you are trying to do, which is sort of really allow the public to understand the men and women that make up these organizations and what drives them. And I talked to some other people and say, hey, did you see James Comey's interview? And they go, yeah, that guy's got a political motivation. People don't trust anymore. Do you think this is working?
It's interesting because there have obviously been people that were in government that are now, trying to speak out. I think obviously very highly of James Comey, and as well as Andrew McCabe. He obviously has his own legal issues right now he's contending with. But I think what puts me kind of in a different category is that, I wasn't fired. I have no axe to grind. I stepped out voluntarily to say, look, the public is being manipulated. And so I don't necessarily put myself in that category. What I do say about those who do speak out is that if you dedicate your life to these institutions, to the mission, and then you see them being destroyed, you can't stay silent. You have to be able to speak out. I didn't think that was appropriate to do while I was inside the FBI. That would feed this deep state narrative. If I was talking to the media as an agent just to complain about the administration. But to your point about whether the narrative is working, I think it is because we look at polling data, and what's really fascinating is among Republicans. Back in 2014. Gallup did a poll, and in the range of Republicans, there was some 74, 75% who had high confidence in the FBI. Today, that number is less than 50%. This is talking about the president's base, the Republican Party. And so it tells us that narrative is taking hold, that these people are believing this nonsense, that these institutions are corrupt. And that may take a generation to change, but if people aren't speaking out to help explain the truth, and, again, it may go on for longer.
Let me ask you the flip side of Anne-Marie's question before we let you go, which is, she talked about public perception, and you just gave us some really stark numbers there. What about within the FBI? How does it feel to be an FBI agent, or not just a field agent, somebody who works at the FBI or any of our intelligence agencies, to go to work every day, to know that you're putting your life on the line in defense of this country, to know that the commander-in-chief is disparaging you, to know that the commander-in-chief is undermining all the work that you're doing, to know that the commander-in-chief sometimes puts assets at risk with some of the things he says and some of the things he does. What's the morale like today in 2019 within the FBI?
You know, I've talked to a lot of people inside the FBI, obviously former colleagues, and the theme that I see both in the field and at headquarters is regardless of their own political affiliation. Some people, you know their political affiliation, some you don't. Doesn't impact their work, but they're human beings. But the one theme that I've noticed is building anger. It started as frustration. What is the White House doing? Calling us corrupt, really? And then now, as this persisted, this campaign, it's really starting to anger people because their work is potentially impacted by this campaign. And what I mean by that is when an FBI agent knocks on someone's door and they need help investigating a case or recruiting a source, an informant, the willingness of that person to help is directly correlated with their view of the agency. If they think that this person works for somewhere that's corrupt, they're criminal, I heard the president say it, are they going to question whether or not to help law enforcement? That impacts public safety. When a jury sits in the courtroom and a judge sits in the courtroom and an FBI agent rises to testify, if they're thinking in their mind, oh, you know, is this corrupt agency that I heard about that was going after the president? That could impact. So there are real world consequences. Again, the theme that I've seen, people are very angry. One thing you know that I write about in the book is the long-term public safety aspect, especially as it relates to 2020. I tell my former colleagues in the FBI, if you thought the last 2 years were bad as it relates to the president's attack, the next election through 2020 is going to be unbearable because President Trump has already said that the FBI and this witch hunt deep state crowd has robbed him of the first 3 years of his presidency. So I think that's going to be a platform to him to try to bill himself as the victim as we go into the election, to try to get some type of support among the population that may believe that these agencies are corrupt.
Hey, do you think your former boss James Comey made any mistakes?
I do, and I write about him. And I got my job working for him because I was very critical of him during an exchange, and he liked that. He liked to be surrounded by people who would give him, the truth. And so that was his leadership style. But as I say, people who sign up for these jobs, FBI director, attorney general, any major position in government, that every action you take is going to be scrutinized, and that's fair. And so I do the same. And I try to do that as a service to the reader, to your viewers, to understand that they're getting this unvarnished view of people who were living this investigation. No one gets a pass.
Tell me one thing that you thought he did wrong.
Well, you go back and look at the Hillary Clinton investigation, right? And so we all know the press conference that he held. He's described it and others that he was jumping on grenades for people who would run away from them. So the Justice Department, they didn't want to have anything to do with ensuring that this investigation wasn't politicized. And so he obviously took a bold step to remove the FBI's, from the DOJ and make that announcement. But the way he characterized her behavior, I criticize. Criticizing the behavior of someone that you're then not going to recommend be charged. That's one example. Another quickly is his handling of his memos, right? Right. We know about, and it's interesting because it was a public service that the American people know that the president tried to obstruct an investigation. That is good for us to know. The method of giving that to a friend who then gave it to a reporter, I think hurt him more than it helped because there were other vehicles. Look at this whistleblower we're talking about right now, the proper channels for dealing with information that troubles you.
Well, but could you point to this whistleblower story? This is a good way to button up this discussion. Can you point to what is breaking now across the last couple of days and say, had Director Comey done what this whistleblower did, perhaps we would never know what had transpired in that meeting with the President of the United States because they would put the kibosh on it right away, and he felt that the only way to get that information out was to utilize another method that perhaps, was it ethical or not ethical is the question.
No, it's a great question. I think that the difference here is that, obviously at that time there was a little bit of a different dynamic. Here, we have a Justice Department, as I mentioned, who, there are questions about their level of independence that we've seen proof of. With the past administration, Comey was worried about the perception, right? There wasn't anything that he saw the DOJ was doing that was wrong. He just thought, okay, I'm going to, announce this publicly. But I think he did have the congressional option. He could have gone to the members of Congress in these committees and, said, here are my memos. I'm not going to release this, but over to you. And if the Democrats and Republicans both had that information, they wouldn't sit on it, right? Knowing both parties have it. Here in this whistleblower case, it's not even getting to Congress, and that's the rub. If the administration can itself protect information that may be troubling, illegal, or even embarrassing in violation of the whistleblower law, that is a very big deal.
Well, Josh Campbell, we could talk to you for a whole hour,
but if not, you can read the book.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's called Crossfire Hurricane. It's available online and in stores now.